see, the universe is material. My experience with things is, this is stuff. I drop it, it breaks, and so on and so forth. Work off my experiences here. And that's fine. But it doesn't mean that I rule out, a priori, any transcendental objects. Things like God or souls. Well, if there is some evidence coming along that is convincing that these things exist, I'm happy to accept those things. But as long as there's no evidence on that, well, I withhold my judgment. And I stick to the things that I can see and feel and work with, and that have proved successful in explaining reality for thousands of years. Let's see. That was one thing. You also mentioned ethical naturalism. So the idea that we cannot really, or you insinuated that we cannot really derive ethics from a naturalistic worldview. I would greatly contest this. If you, for example, base your notion of morality based, so if you accept, and I agree, that is an assumption that you have to make, that suffering is bad. If you just make this assumption, then I think you can derive a great deal of ethics just from that. And I just get the sign that my time is up, and so I'll leave it at that. Thank you. So, I don't know whether you have been a member of a grand jury. Jury duty?
No.
You don't either. Okay. But suppose you're a member of a grand jury.
Okay.
And so there's the accused person is there, and then different forms of evidences are presented. For example, there's an eyewitness account. There are fingerprints. There's DNA samples. And some person said, "Oh, I just dreamt that this person is guilty." So then some forms of evidence will be accepted, right? And some forms of evidence will be rejected. So for example, the person said who dreamed that the person is guilty probably will be rejected flat out, right? And the eyewitness account, okay, yeah, that is sometimes valid, but it's probably not as strong as fingerprints or DNA. So you would agree with this distinction of evidence.
Right. I think when we talk about evidence, it has to be taken in the context of what are you studying. Mm-hmm. For example, I mean, the rules of evidence for a historian are very different than the rules of evidence for a physicist.
Right.
So, see, and that's why I think, once again, it seems to me in your whole discussion, you have prioritized evidence in terms of scientific evidence. Once again, I'm very comfortable with, I have a high degree of confidence in science. So, but the question is it fair, for example, can we scientifically prove that Abraham Lincoln existed? No, we couldn't. We would be reliant at some point on something that's not empirical, namely documentary evidence. Now, is science involved in that endeavor? Sure it is. But to suggest that here's a standard of evidence, and anything that doesn't fit the standard of evidence, namely science, isn't using evidence.
I haven't even asked my question.
Oh, okay.
But I appreciate your response anyway. So I just see that you agree that there are different forms of evidence, right? Absolutely. Okay. So now, in particular, there's a difference. You acknowledge the difference between objective scientific facts and subjective claims.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and then why don't you see a difference in trust in science, okay, which reflects this high respectability it is given, with the faith in revelation, which is given no credence in the courtroom. There's obviously a difference.
Well, because you're talking now you're talking about what qualifies as legal evidence.
Uh-huh.
So to me, the question really is, in terms of what are we trying to answer the question? Are we trying to establish whether something is legal or whether something is true?
No, once
again, I think as a philosopher, I think you keep saying, here's evidence. This is the only legitimate area of evidence, and I say that's not even science can get away with that.
I'm not saying this is only. I'm just stating that there are different forms of evidence,
sure,
and that we distinguish between them, and you can distinguish between them. But so the whole question is, do atheists have faith, right?
Right.
And so when we say that atheists base their beliefs on science and scientific evidence, well, this is qualitatively different from faith in the sense of belief in a God and revelation. That's all I'm saying. You accept this difference in the courtroom, but you reject it in claiming that atheists have faith.
Well, I think once again, in terms of the courts, the question is what satisfies the legal canons based upon our Constitution. You can't privilege a particular religious perspective based upon the First Amendment. I'm not a legal scholar, but it seems to me to get into just, basically what I've seen in terms of legal disputes in the courts, they don't get into the area of religion. Because that's not their area, that's not their domain.
I've not even mentioned religion, just faith and revelational dreams.
Right, but that's typically considered religious evidence.
So I'm first doing my rounds of questions, and then So let me. How many?
You're
minutes?
asking questions for 6 to 7 minutes.
Okay, so how many minutes do I have left?
2.
All right. Okay, so we have to speed up.
Okay.
So this the faith healing example that I brought.
Sure.
So do you think parents are justified in withholding medical treatment and relying on faith? No. Good.
How's that for a quick answer?
Okay, great. But so follow-up question then. So you acknowledge the qualitative difference between objective scientific facts and subjective claims and beliefs, faith beliefs.
Well, I think faith can involve objective facts as well.
Well, but in this case, you say it's not okay to base your...
Sure. And the reason why I say so is because it seems to me as a Christian theologian, that God has given us the ability to do science. In fact, I would argue, look at in terms of medical technology, most of these guys are theists.
This is the point I didn't get to answering. The faith of the early scientists. Maybe I can talk to this when you ask me clues about this. But what I'm getting is just there is this difference, right? And you accept this. You accept the difference, and you actually accept that the scientific evidence for medical treatment is stronger than the veracity of faith in healing.
No, I don't accept that, because for theologians, we believe in what's called general revelation. So we see science as an extension of general revelation.
All right, but you don't have evidence for it.
No, we do have evidence for it.
Okay.
I mean, that's why, once again, I'm suggesting, you go to the history of medicine. And I would argue that when you look at the history of medicine, it was greatly impacted, it was greatly advanced because of commitment to theism, the belief that the world is intelligible, that God has given us minds to use and to understand our world, and to develop medical technology.
Okay, so you can just as well say that science developed despite the impediments that were put on them through...
well, if you can make the historical argument, I would challenge you to do so.
Yeah. All right, but then my last question is, because my time is, I think, almost up. So I assume you have faith in the existence of God.
I do.
Okay.
And I have reasons to believe God
So
exists.
my question is, what event would cause you to lose your faith? Could there be
What event? Well, if I found a compelling argument that I thought was conclusive that God doesn't exist.
Okay, so some kind of empirical evidence, or...
It may be empirical, it may not be. I'm not going to limit to empirical, because once again, see, this goes back to my point. You keep appealing to empiricism, but I'm suggesting you can't be consistent in that, because you keep helping yourself to non-empirical considerations. Is it my turn? So let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question. How would you, as a scientist who's committed to empiricism, okay, and the only way you can know things is through your sense perception, how could you prove that the external world is real without engaging in circular reasoning?
So what do you mean by real?
In other words, make an example here. How do you know that this podium is real?
Okay. So
without presupposing that your sense experiences are vertical.
All right. So I think what you have to so this is of course one instance of a general skeptical argument advanced by skeptics, right? So the thing is, I mean, this is similar to these questions. How do we know that the world wasn't created 5 minutes ago?
Sure.
Right? And so to that you can say, for example, well, the world 5 minutes ago. Well, I can't prove that it didn't happen that way. But why 5 minutes ago? Why not 7.5 minutes? Why not 2 years and 5 months?
But that doesn't answer the question.
Well, wait a second. It shows something very important about these skeptical arguments. It shows, well, there's an infinite number of possibilities that you can advance for things that I cannot disprove. Well, all of those are equally likely, or I should say unlikely. And so the probability for each and every one of those claims is practically zero.
How would you establish
and
how would you establish the probabilities?
Well, you have,
If
if each and every event is equally likely, you divide by the 100% probability that one of those is true by the number of.
But how did you establish your initial probabilities?
Well, the initial probability is, 5 minutes ago is just as likely as 6 minutes ago. But actually, I think
so
there's actually one, no.
Okay.
There's actually one number, 13.7 billion years, that is much more likely than all the others.
On what basis?
And why? On the basis of evidence, of physics, of cosmology.
Now how'd you?
And so that's how we counter these.
Right, but how did you gain knowledge of cosmology and physics without engaging in sense perceptions?
Okay, so all right. So the other argument is, suppose, so when you say, is this desk real? Okay? So what is the alternative? What is the alternative? The alternative is, this is just playing out in my mind, and you are also kind of just a projection. So it's similar to this, we're living in a matrix argument, right? How do we know that we're not living in a matrix? Well, again, we don't really know. And so there's two possibilities. Either way, either we can escape reality and go to the level of the matrix. And, well, if that is possible, if we ever see this being possible, well, then we have evidence for it. Then we know. And if we never see it, well, then again you can do the probabilistic argument. There are so many possibilities of the matrix that each and every one is practically, the probability is practically zero. And the second thing is, actually it doesn't matter. If we're living in a matrix, and that is part of another matrix, and we have never any way of finding out, it doesn't really matter. If this desk is real or not, it doesn't matter. I live my life, you live your life, we discuss it, we have fun or not, and...
So how does so then, if that's the case, then how can there be scientific knowledge?
Well, what is scientific knowledge? Scientific knowledge, so you were asking me what scientific truth is. Is that what
what I'm trying to get you to admit to is that you have to trust your sense perceptions.
Yes, I would actually agree to that.
Okay.
I trust sense perception.
Now,
but that is not the faith you have in a biblical God, right? That tells you who to have sex with, on which days you have to.
Well, since God is not a sense perceptible being, in that particular instance, no.
Right.
But there are other types of knowledge I can gain through experiences that are not necessarily sensual. They're not through my sense perceptions. For example, you mentioned the soul. I take it that we should have more confidence that we have a soul than we do that we have a physical body. The reason why? Because I am immediately aware of my sense perceptions. In fact, you seem to be immediately aware of your sense perceptions too, since you kept appealing to them. But what are sense perceptions? They're sensory experiences. Now, if you want to argue that they're strictly physical, as in physicalism, you've got a problem on your hands. And the problem is, if physical objects, as we know them to be, is what science tells them to be, occupy space. But if I poke you with a pen, it's a thought experiment. If I poke you with a pen, we can talk about the physical activities, but there's that first-person sensory experience of having